Welcome to the Thriving Leadership Academy podcast. I'm Christopher Harding, soon to be joined by my colleague and business partner, Will Wilkinson, and our very special guest, Ariel Curry. Ariel is a phenomenal writer, a ghostwriter, a writer's coach, and a communication coach. She's just a gem of a human being, and you're really going to enjoy the conversation with her and the insights she has to share. Stay tuned. We were commenting on how neatly organized your bookshelves are.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I did that. I had to just change things up. I made a book tree, like a Christmas tree, made of books, with lights and everything, bows and everything. And so when I was putting them back, when we were taking all our Christmas decorations down, I was like, you know what? Let's do something different. We'll organize by color. So
exactly. That's
very good.
Color coordinated.
I thought it might be a green screen or something because it's so well designed.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
It's a pleasure to meet you. I know you and Will have had a chance to catch up ahead of time, but I was enjoyed your Substack and your website.
Thank you.
I think, we were talking about just the whole talent of writing. And obviously you're focusing on helping authors, which is great. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who could use that help. I think too, my guess is that some of the same things that apply for authors apply for anybody in business who's trying to communicate something in writing.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's very much the case. In fact, one of my quote for the year, I can't just do a word for the year because one word is just not going to ever be enough. So I've chosen a quote for this year. And my quote for this year is from Annie Dillard, and it's from her book, The Writing Life. And she says, one of the things I know about writing is this: spend it all, shoot it, play it, lose it, all, right away, every time. Do not hoard what seems good for a later place in the book or for another book. Give it all, give it now. Yeah. And I love everything about this quote because it captures not just how I want to show up in my writing, and what I hope is reflected in my Substack newsletter is that, I try to be as generous as I can with with my knowledge, with whatever topic I'm writing about. I just want to give everything I know about that topic to my newsletter every single week. I send it out on Fridays. I try to embody this in the books that I write as well. I advise my authors to give everything. A lot of authors want to hold stuff back from their readers and say, oh, well, I don't want to give away this because it might cut into my business or whatever. And I say, no. You've got to give everything to your readers. But that's also how I want to just live my life, right? Like whatever I'm doing, I want to be all in. I want to show up with all of myself. This is the perfect example. Like I've got my foster daughter here with me right now, but I want to be as present as I can here in this conversation too. So, and it's not easy. There's always going to be things pulling us away from wherever we are, but staying very present and very mindful in whatever we're doing, that's really what that quote is about. And that works for books and for life in general. So all that to say, yes, I agree.
And we do too, obviously. The thing about Annie's work that's so challenging for people are those morning papers.
Oh.
And, writing and then letting them go, throwing them away. That, when I first did that gazillion years ago, was the greatest challenge because, every word is sacred. You got to hang on to it. And I agree with you. It's a principle that relates to life too, because we hoard on many levels. And I mean, just look at people's garages. In America, nobody puts their car in a garage anymore. It's just crap, and outside sits the car. So it's a good lesson for us about everything.
Right. It's really, it ties into the idea of abundance and scarcity. And we have this scarcity mindset where we're biologically, we want to protect ourselves and hang on to everything. And we're always kind of thinking of the worst case scenario. And ultimately, that's not what makes other people feel safe. Right. And so we have to kind of find this balance between trying to protect ourselves. Ultimately, a lot of the ways that we try to protect ourselves doesn't really work. And so instead, to adopt this abundance mindset where we focus more on giving to others, providing for others, giving so generously. And that actually creates an environment of safety that protects us too. These are all things I've been thinking about and learning about too.
Well, that whole idea of creating, as you're talking about it, creating safety, but there's also, right, trust that if I continue to give, that the well's not going to run dry, that if I continue to give, that I will generate more of an abundance of things I can give, and that by, withholding, there's a dynamic that happens when somebody is withholding that just doesn't feel safe. Like you're talking about, that sense of trust from somebody who's very generous, I think is always, almost always, pays dividends.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So Ariel, I wanted to ask you about a comment that's right on your website. I really liked it. You said you help people write books that the world needs to read. That's really a cool comment. And I wanted to get your perspective on what kind of books does the world need to read? Like when you say that, and what is in your mind as to books that the world needs to read?
That's a great question. And it's purposely a little bit vague, right? And, it could apply to a lot of things. I hope to attract, because obviously this is my business too, and the people that I want to work with are usually professionals. They are often educators. They're often, I work with a lot of doctors, nutritionists. I've worked with some psychologists. I'm a ghostwriter, book coach, and editor, all of those things. And so I hope to attract kind of those professionals who work every single day to make the world a better place. Those are the people who I just am inspired by the most, because they're out there living it every single day. They're out there, taking these steps. They're on the ground with these things. They're not only thought leaders, a lot of them are thought leaders too, and, often speaking at conferences and stuff, but they also have kind of this groundedness in the reality of everyday life, and a groundedness in research, and a groundedness in knowing what is actually going to work. And so I specialize in nonfiction, and I want those kinds of books from people who really understand the daily realities of people's lives, because I think that's what's going to move the needle, is having more authors who have that reader focused perspective. And they're talking to their clients every day. They're talking to their patients every day, and they can speak not just from this perspective of, I think this is going to work. There's a lot of thought leaders, and I don't mean to disparage anyone, but there's a lot of people who read a lot and then they kind of recycle what they read. And that's an okay strategy. But I want people who know from their own experience too. And so those are the people that I'm trying to attract when I say, what the world needs to read as an author. That's usually coming from a place of, let's say I have a doctor that I'm working with, and he was seeing the exact same problems for years. People were coming to him with the same misconceptions, the same ideas, and he would have to kind of debunk these myths again and again and again and again and again. And he was like, people just need to know the truth about these things. And so we're writing a book. And that's a perfect example of, what I'm really hoping to accomplish. Those are the books that I hope more people read. And those are the books that I think the world really needs to read.
Well, I love how you're saying that. I mean, and making a distinction between somebody who curates great information and somebody who's sharing it from their own experience, or maybe both. But what got me curious as you were describing that, and especially with your first quote, was how did you fall in love with this whole idea of writing? What got you to where you are now?
Yeah. Well, it started when I was a little girl and I read Nancy Drew. I was in love with Nancy Drew books. And so I wanted to write my own mysteries. And so I wrote a series of mysteries about the kids on my streets. And that was how I got started. And then I got a journal for my 7th birthday, I believe. And I have been an avid journaler since I was 7 years old. Still a practice that I absolutely love and maintain. And, to be honest, I didn't think that I was going to be a public writer in any sense. I always thought I'm going to be a private writer. I wanted to work with books, but I kind of thought my role is to be in the background and my role is to help other people put great books out in the world. I didn't think I was creative enough. What kind of started to change all of that was that I started a book blog 10 years ago, and actually more than that, like a dozen years ago. And I started writing book reviews. And again, everything for me was kind of just this love of books and just putting books out there in the world and, celebrating books in whatever way I could. But to my surprise, people really enjoyed reading what I had to say on my book blog. And I started, kind of getting experimental and occasionally doing more personal posts. And I always got really great feedback on that. And so that kind of spiraled, and I did that for a long time. And then when I ended up leaving my publishing job, a big part of that was my motivation was, I want to focus more on my writing and I want to see what I can write. And it's been an ongoing evolution. I started ghostwriting for people last year, and that has been really, going well. And then I'm writing my own book. My book is going to come out this year in August. It's called Hungry Authors. And so that's going to be, that's a book for aspiring authors, obviously. But then on my Substack, I've started to take more experiments there and more chances and risks with that. And that's been going really well too. So,
Cool.
it's been an ongoing evolution. It's not been something that I felt confident about from the beginning. It's been growing for a very, very long time.
Very cool. Well, I read through a number of your newsletters, which I really enjoyed. And in one of them, you talk about books. You say, well, you're referencing the prediction back a number of years that books would become more animated with social media, etc. And
Yeah.
I love the way you wrote that up. You said, well, it never happened.
Mm-hmm.
And the same predictions being made today in 2023 that was made in 2016, I think it was. But you say that books are not broken. Let's talk about the fact that there is less reading going on, because the actual statistics are that, I don't know how accurate these polls can ever be, reading is down overall in the last 5 years, about 25%. So I'm a book lover. I read all the time, same as you, grew up that way. Say a little more about your confidence that books are not broken, because I hope you're right.
Well, that's interesting. Reading may be down, but book sales are not. So books are still selling, even if maybe people aren't reading them as much or reading as often or whatever. So that's interesting, because maybe we have these two, parallel tracks going on, where there's book sales. What does the, consumer data tell us? And then what does the reading actually look like? And they can be different for sure. I do think that it is harder to read and that there's a lot more competition for books. So books have to compete. There's nothing broken with books, but they do have to compete with more things now. We have to compete with Substack newsletters for me. They've got to compete with social media. They've got to compete with TV and movies and everything, and just life, right? So books definitely do have a higher hurdle to jump over in order to be read. But I don't see people choosing books that are different, if that makes sense. Like, I don't see people choosing when people want a book, they want a book. They don't want a book that's augmented by all these things, or a book that's trying to be something other than itself. If someone's a reader and they're choosing a book in that moment, it's because they want usually the physical experience of reading that book.
Yeah, I appreciated one commentator saying that in the age of short attention spans and glued to the screen, reading a book is diametrically opposite. It's tactile and it's a longer burn. So this author, whoever it was actually prescribing reading as a balance to the frantic nature of everyday attention spans being so short. I really agree with that. I love just opening a book and reading it leisurely. It calms my whole nervous system down.
Yeah. Oh, that makes me wonder. I have no idea if this is the case at all. I'm just going to spitball a theory that just popped in my head. But, I've been reading a lot about EMDR therapy. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but, therapy that involves using both sides of our brain and lots of repetitive movements. And I do wonder if something about the repetitive movement of turning pages and the tactile nature of that may be, putting both sides of our brains to work. This is, again, I know nothing about this. Don't quote me on this at all. But I can see that, something like that being the case. You're right. It is very tactile. It is more engaging different parts of our brains. And that makes it, like you said, a slower burn. It's something that lasts a little bit longer. And that's amazing. That's very healing, I think.
Yeah, it's I've read a lot on the changing nature of reading habits and so on. And one of the ways that they talk about that showing up is that audiobooks or Audible, if you're an Amazon user, really are having a larger portion of the way people consume books or absorb books. And it's interesting. If I look at myself, I've always been an avid reader. I was telling Will before you came on that at one point I had hundreds of books and they were alphabetized, and ended up making major donations to libraries at one point, because I realized I was hoarding. I wasn't letting other people have access to these wonderful books. But in my own reading habits, I started to go to Kindle a lot, because it was so transportable, especially for traveling. I went to audiobooks, but there is something kinesthetic about the experience of, as Will was describing, a book. And I think, also there's a difference in how, if you're talking about a multimedia book where they're trying to show you what was being said, there's such a difference there. I'm thinking of one writer, both Will and I at one point used to be involved in films and television and so on. And there was one particular author named Pat McManus, a phenomenal outdoor writer for Field and Stream, and wrote hilarious serialized books about people's calamities outdoors. And the challenge for those ever being produced in any other format other than his books was that he relied on your imagination to really bring to life. It was what he didn't say in his descriptions that allowed your imagination to fill in the blanks. And I think that's something that you don't get outside of the written word in the way that we're talking about it.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's so interesting. In the book world, there's lots of readers who say, oh, well, the book is always better than the movie, let's say. And I have never believed that. I've always kind of defended movies and said, no, it's a different art form, and you have to kind of let it be its own art form. And so you kind of have to go into movies like, everyone, this is, really old now, but everyone was freaking out when Harry Potter came out as a movie because who you thought Hagrid was, maybe he looked different in the movies. And I remember this being such a big, scandal almost. And people just, always kind of freak out when a book is made into a movie because things are going to be different. But it has to be its own art form. And I love that.
Yeah. I mean, I have a younger brother who recalled years ago that when we were children sharing a bedroom, I'm a year and a half older, I read to him from Lord of the Rings every night.
Oh,
and
nice.
he loved that, but that's why he never will see the movies.
What?
And
no.
He's a filmmaker. He's made like 15 films, but he refuses to see Lord of the Rings for this very reason. And I think he's missing out on a lot.
I
It's
agree.
a medium. And, I'm recalling a film premiere back in Oregon where my wife and I lived part of the year, at the little theater downtown. Chris, remember the Varsity there?
Yeah.
Was a local guy who had graduated from college, gone on to make movies. He came back and he played his movie. At the end of it, he did a Q&A. And so some woman in the back said, well, the ending, I'm not sure of what the ending means. What does it mean? And he said, well, what does it mean to you? And she was totally shocked. And she said, well, I think it means da 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 da. And he listened and he said, that's really different than what I think it means to me. Thank you. That's so interesting.
Oh,
And
I
the
love
whole
that.
theater kind of went into shock. And then he noticed, and he said, the purpose of any communication is for us to interpret it personally and make meaning out of it rather than accept some, dogma from the creator. Never forgotten that. I thought that was so wise.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember this is back in college when I was an English major, we had a big debate about, basically what is right? Is it the author's intentions or the reader's interpretations? And the answer is like yes. All of them.
All of
There's
the
no
above.
right or wrong to it. It's just, it is what it is. And the author is making art purposely ambiguous, and all art asks the viewer or the reader or the participant to engage in some way. There should be an element of engagement and participation in any piece of art, I believe. Even, looking at a painting on the wall, there is something that you are asked to do to make meaning of it. This is what our brains naturally want to do with any piece of art, is find this meaning and find the significance in it. And whatever meaning or significance you do find in it, you're right.
Right.
Well, it's Will and I in the work we do with companies and coaching individuals, that whole thing of meaning is a big focus for us, because I think we assign meaning without realizing we're doing it. And so we play around with the whole idea that you can play around with your life as if it was an episode in a series. And so what role are you going to adopt today? What role will help you accomplish what you need to today? And what do you want to make things mean? What's the meaning you want to create? Because what I make it mean is going to very much affect how I show up, how I come across, what I say and do. And so that whole notion of meaning and letting ourselves be much more creative in our day-to-day life, to adopt different roles, to create different meaning, to explore this whole notion, seems like something that could come quite natural to somebody who is writing and creating all the time.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I sometimes will just ask a person, if your life was a movie, what kind of movie would it be?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, well, right now, a horror movie, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Other times, oh, it's a rom-com. I just fell in love. Other times, it's a slapstick comedy, or it's a drama, it's a mystery. And it's just
Mm-hmm.
a simple way. Part of the work Chris and I do is help people identify the story they're telling in their life.
Yeah.
Because the story is going to have an ending. There's always somewhere it's going. And if
Yeah.
a person stops and says, well, where is this story leading me? Then they might go, you know what? I don't really like that ending. If I
Yeah.
change
Yeah.
the story, I'm likely to get to that ending. I mean, as a writer, it's helpful actually to start with the ending, because then you know where
Yes.
you're going, right?
Yes. I was just going to say this is it, I often work with people after they've been through some kind of hard circumstance in their life, especially, memoir authors. They come to me wanting to write about some kind of crazy thing that they've been through. And usually what they come to me saying is, well, this happened to me, and this happened to me, and this happened to me, and this happened to me. And it was
Right.
awful. And it was so hard. And I'm like, that's, I empathize with you. And how did you change because of that? And what did you do because of that? Like, how does that change how you live your life? That's the answer that I need to know before we can start working on the book, because that transformation is going to be the key to the story, and it's going to be the key to to inspiring other people. But a lot of people don't know and haven't taken the time to ask themselves those questions. So I love that you're putting it in those words. And I'm reflecting right now. I'm like, what kind of a movie would my life be right now? It'd be somewhere between a drama and like a slapstick comedy, I think.
Yeah.
Especially because, with new kids, in the house and things constantly changing, my husband and I are just flying by the seat of our pants most days.
Yeah, I saw a movie. If you haven't seen it, you might appreciate it. It's a few years old. It's called Instant Family with Mark Wahlberg.
Oh, I have heard about this, but I have not seen it yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you might enjoy it. Everything
Yeah.
you just described is kind of like what that movie is. But I
Right.
think, the whole thing with communication too, I love that you're asking your people who are coming to you, what did this lead to? How did this change you? What's the realization or the transformation that it's brought about in your life? Because I think that as a habit, let alone as a writing, writing technique, as a habit is hugely powerful. To really be able to ask, what am I making this mean? What do I want to do with this?
Yeah.
And I think there's something about the process of writing. When I write most of the time on a computer, but every once in a while I'll write with a pencil or pen on paper, because there's something about the flow of inspiration, if you will, that happens differently pen to paper than it does fingers on the keyboard. I don't know what your experience is with that, or if you play around with that at all.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, I'm an avid journaler, and that is by hand. I've been doing that for years, and this is kind of gross, but I often think, like, if I don't journal regularly, I feel constipated. Like my brain and my emotions feel constipated if I don't do that regularly, because you're right, there is something. And again, we're coming back to this idea of like the tactile, kinesthetic nature of writing and reading. It does something different to our brains, and it helps us process what's happening to us, especially when we are going through hard things or when life feels chaotic. And actually, I do often recommend one, especially for my memoir writers, if you have gone through anything hard that you are now trying to write about, you have to do some journaling, or you have to do your morning pages. You've got to find some kind of writing, and preferably by hand writing outlet, because what's going to come out in your memoir, if you try to write your memoir without that, and I know because I've watched it happen countless times, what's going to come out is a lot of emotional gunk because you haven't processed that somewhere else. And so you've got to kind of do your healing work. And a lot of that is writing about it, because our brains are forced to make meaning. You have to do all of that work first before you try to write a memoir that is going to be palatable to readers who don't know you. Yeah. And who aren't, living in your head with you, and who can't understand, everything that you've been through. You have to find the right words to explain it to them. And that takes a lot of experimentation. So the writing that you do with journaling, the writing that you do with morning pages, even if you don't realize it, it is experimentation. It is finding the right words and testing things out to see, does this story work? Does this make sense? Does this feel good to me? And then you can take those words, whatever did feel good, whatever did feel true and authentic to you and your experience, then you take those words and you put them in a memoir, and you put them in whatever kind of format that other people are going to be digesting and learning from about your experience. That's so important to the process.
Yeah, totally resonate. I've done ghostwriting for decades, and the challenge, of course, is people hire a ghostwriter because they don't want to write, or they don't think they can. Yeah. And increasingly over the years, I've realized I have to get them writing. They may not be a good writer, but they've got to do something. They've got to focus their thoughts and get it down on paper in one way or another. In another one of your newsletters I enjoyed, you talked about writer's block, being in a writing funk. And I liked the way where you went with that it's important to find your why. And that's, of course, the topic of a number of best-selling books, etc. How do you help people find their why? I know it relates to the book, but obviously it relates to life. A lot of people don't know their why. They don't know why they're doing what they're doing. How do you help people find their why?
I ask a lot of questions about what the reader needs and why the reader needs that. And I ask a lot of questions about their transformation. So let's say they come to me writing a memoir, wanting to write about their experience. I'm asking them, how did you change? And a lot of questions about what do you want the reader to learn? And it's a little bit of a roundabout way of getting at the why, but usually the why ends up coming out when I start asking those questions. The other thing that I like to ask people is, like, what do you hope will change for your reader's life because of this book? What do you hope is going to change in whoever, takes this in? And again, the why starts to come out because it's kind of underlying all of these things. I do think also that it comes up with people who feel like I did in that post that you're talking about, who feel like they're stuck in some way, or that they're just, whatever they're trying to produce, it's not coming out the way that they want it to. And so then I know at that moment when reality is not matching desires and expectations for the writing life, there is some kind of disconnect, and you have to kind of go back to those basics. So at that point, I may explicitly ask them like, hey, why is this important to you? And what do you think, what's motivating you? What's at risk if you don't write this? And sometimes the answer is not much. And then we know, so is it that important? Is it actually that important to write it if there's actually not that much at risk for you? And that might be part of the problem. Maybe the problem is that there needs to be some other, something else that you want to say. And we have to find that thing. So let's find that thing.
That is such a great question. What's at risk? A lot of times in coaching in business, we're working on trying to help somebody solve a problem or, communicate something to somebody they work with. Maybe it's their boss, maybe it's colleagues. And I think you asked a question that's so pertinent to that is, what do you hope happens from your writing of this? If I'm going to write somebody a memo or an email or a text, or I'm even going to show up in their office and say something, what is it that I hope happens? And therefore, what do I need to say or do to create the best chance of that happening? And it seems like the questions you're asking around, why they're writing a book or a chapter in a book, etc., is such a great tool for life in general, of getting real clear on why am I doing this and what do I hope happens?
Yeah. Actually, another fantastic writing coach, her name is Lisa Cooper Ellison. She was asking me some very similar questions like that recently around, my goals for my business and like why do I want to do these things? Why do I want to ghostwrite more? And I was just I hadn't really thought about it, to be honest. And so I was just kind of rambling, and I was like, I don't really know. I'm still kind of confused about what I want to do and where I want to go with all of this. And she was like, are you really confused, or are you choosing to be confused? Oh my gosh. I just kind of, my heart stopped and was like, oh, wait a minute. Because often we actually do know what the right answer is. And sometimes we choose confusion. And I know that has just been a light bulb moment for me to ask myself now, like, if I'm ever feeling confused about something, I say confused in air quotes for those listening. If I'm feeling confused about something, am I actually confused, or am I avoiding the thing that I really want to do? Have I already invested too much energy into kind of the wrong path? And so I feel like I have to stay with it, and therefore I feel stuck on it. Or am I, am I kind of afraid of what would happen if I pursued the thing I really know I should pursue? These are all questions I've had to learn to ask myself, and I'm constantly asking myself, and now ask my authors. So, which I'm sure they love.
Well, speaking of avoidance, one of the modern ways we avoid most everything is social media. And I've really enjoyed your recent series on unsubscribing. Yeah. And I want to ask you how that's going, because with any addiction, and let's just call it what it is, we get addicted to social media. Even when we're not 15, we still get addicted to it. How's it going for you? Because you've really launched this as a major offensive in your own life to let go of that avoidance stuff and unsubscribe. How's it going?
Yeah, well, it's been honestly great. It started with just realizing, I was spending the first like 2 hours of my day going through emails and feeling like I had to read all of them and feeling like I had to, take care of everything. And I am a little bit of an inbox zero fanatic. Like, I don't like letting emails rest. I want things to be addressed. I want emails to be responded to. And I was feeling like this email was becoming this like crazy thing that was just taking over my life. And I was like, I've got to get this under control. So the first thing I had to do was literally unsubscribe from like hundreds of things that I was unsubscribed to. And just that kind of got my curiosity piqued about like, well, what else am I subscribing to that's taking up a lot of my time and energy? And right now, we are foster parents. Energy is a very precious commodity. And so I was like, I need to really seriously reevaluate the things that I'm giving my energy and my time to, because again, going back to that Annie Dillard quote, I want to be all in. I want to be very present with whatever I'm doing. And so, I had to just start looking at other things that I was subscribed to, not just emails, but also like I was subscribed to like something that I was paying for that I didn't even know what it was. And I was like, what the heck is this? Like, $5 a month going to something that doesn't even, I don't even know what it is. And so things like that had to be addressed. And the weight that feels lifted off of my shoulders as I've gone on, and also reevaluated like the mindsets. And a big part of that mindset is like, do I actually need to be looking at my emails, every single day? Do I need to respond to people on time? I know other people want that, but honestly, they're going to be okay 9 times out of 10, unless it's like truly, truly dire, they're going to be okay. And so me kind of expanding my capacity for letting other people be uncomfortable has been a growth area because I was raised as the stereotypical people pleaser. I can't let if I have a sense and I am highly attuned to whether someone else is uncomfortable, if I have any kind of an inkling that someone else is uncomfortable, my immediate reaction is like, let's address it. How can I make you more comfortable? And letting that
wife, she's exactly the same way.
Yeah. Letting that go, because you just can't live your life that way. And I read a newsletter this morning. I'm blanking on who wrote it, but I read a newsletter this morning. Oh, it was Melissa Urban. She's the author of the Big Book of Boundaries, or the Book of Boundaries. And she wrote, people will take as much as you give them. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I've been learning and realizing. And so for me, asking myself, do I really need to be giving this thing? Because they're going to take it. If I offer this, I have to be ready for them to say yes. So do I really want to offer this?
Well, that's again, another great question. I think that applies to all kinds of things in business. Anybody who's a service provider of any kind, that question of, do I really want to offer this? And what's it going to cost me when people start to say yes? What's it going to take out of me is a great question. I mean, there's some things you've identified here. Wanting to only focus, maybe it would be a way to say it, on the places where you want to be all in. And if you don't want to be all in, maybe think about not doing it, at least for now. And, asking why am I doing this? And do I really want to offer this? Those are just brilliant life questions, I think, that apply across the board. You've got me thinking about my own. I have an email account where all of anything I'm going to sign up for, I send it to that account so it doesn't clog up my business email. And I'm thinking about all the things that I see there and mass delete every day. And I'm thinking, I need to go unsubscribe from a whole bunch of stuff right now just to clean it up,
Yeah. I don't know who originally came up with this, but you've probably heard the saying that if it's not a hell yes, it should be a hell no. Right. And I've always heard that and kind of gone like, that's not a very nice perspective. And, there are times in your life when you can afford to be a little bit more, like a little bit less all in, to some things. But right now, and I think for most of us, like that's not the time of life that I'm in. I really need to be able to be very present, with whatever's going on. And, and if I can't be very present, then it needs to be a hell no.
Yeah. Well, I'm guessing, Chris, that we're getting close to time out here. Are we?
Yeah. We're starting to head in for the from the tower, getting messages that we need to land here soon.
Well, I'd love to just expand the conversation a little bit, Ariel, and kind of get your perspective on life, especially from your age. I'm really curious because a lot of the personal things that we deal with in any field are inside a context. And the context we're in as humans on planet Earth in 2023 is so remarkably different than it was even 5 years ago. So I'd love your thoughts on, where we are, how we're adapting to increasing uncertainty in the world, and how we move forward feeling the hell yes in those parts of our lives where we have some control, because in so many of them, we just simply don't. I mean, there's solar flares, there's AI, there's the economy, there's you name it. And then personally, you've got foster kids, you got at least 3 dogs that I counted. How many you got, I don't know. But how do you personally navigate the challenges of 2023 and help your clients do the same? I think you've picked writing as your way of doing it. I think ultimately this is what we're all doing in our own ways. It's just finding how to navigate the complexity of this world.
Yeah, Ariel's guide for navigating 2024.
Oh, goodness. I mean, I don't have all the answers. Like many others, I often feel overwhelmed by all of the stuff going on in the world. My husband and I are very idealistic people. We feel very deeply on all of those things, the wars going on and everything. Those, we feel very deeply all of those things. All of the problems with COVID and everything, all of that impacts us as it does everyone emotionally, and not just our physical lives too. I have had to let go of a lot of expectations of what I thought my grown-up life would look like, right? When I was a kid, I think I saw my parents and how their lives have gone, and I just assumed my life is going to be that and better. And, in some ways it is, but life is surprising. And I have adopted the philosophy of Stoicism. That is something that I study and means a lot to me. Ryan Holiday's work with the Daily Stoic has absolutely changed my life. But the idea of amor fati, which is the love of fate, and just having acceptance for what is, that has been a massive practice that has really helped me. Last year, almost a year ago, actually, I had a really good friend who passed away from cancer. She was my age. We were just a few months apart, and she got cancer at age 30. And I walked with her through the whole thing. For 3 years, she battled with cancer, and we had really wonderful, beautiful, deep conversations about this problem in her life and this thing that was attacking her body. And it could have attacked her soul too, and it didn't. She really taught me the practice of radical acceptance and love of fate in a way that I think has really set me up for success in a lot of other things. Watching her courage as she faced this, and knowing, there were some things she chose not to share, and that was fine. Obviously, I respected that. But, her knowing like my time is coming to an end, and watching her prioritize how she was going to spend the time that she had left. Hearing her tell other people, it's okay. I don't want to continue treatments. I'm ready to go, and I'm okay with that, and I've accepted that. It is so powerful to watch someone go through that process, and it sets an incredible example. She's going to, her legacy, I think, is that example that she is leaving, at least for me, and I know for many others too. But that's how I'm handling all of the craziness, is like, what do I need to just accept and integrate into my mindset, and figure out how to be the best person that I can be despite those circumstances. And that's the challenge that all of us get to embrace every day.
Yeah. Wow. Beautifully said. Something so powerful in what you're talking about with radical acceptance is that it's not a resignation.
Yes.
It's very active. Like you said, it's this active acceptance of what is. And as you said, determining, and so what am I going to do in that regard. Well, how do I want to incorporate this in my life in a way that's useful and practical and so on? So, yeah, brilliantly stated.
Yeah.
Wow.
What will you do with your one precious life?
That's right.
Marry all of
Yes.
them. Marry all of them.
Yeah.
This has been so great, Ariel. It feels like we could go on for hours, but
Thank you. Yeah.
we should wind it up. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your patience with the interruptions.
You're so welcome. Not a problem at all. She's such a cutie.
Yeah. She's a sweetheart for sure.
Yeah. Well, wishing you the best, and we'll definitely be keeping track of your ongoing progress.
Thank you.
Very inspirational. Wishing you just all kinds of good stuff.
Same to you. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you, Ariel.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, Chris.